Hi, I'm Jay, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Gigi, Posea, and Ari. I wanted to do a few characters that were less popular, but that I still had a few ideas for. So this is going to be a bit of a lighter load redesign episode, where I'm not going to be doing any shading, just flats, and keeping the design somewhat simple. So starting off with Gigi's body type, I had already done a redesign of her and Wisp back in 2020, but I was never really satisfied with Gigi's design in particular, so I wanted to do another crack at it. So I'm keeping the same body type that I did for her originally, which consists of large ears and inspiration from scorpions, since I always really liked that aspect of her design, and it also ties into classical Jinn mythology. So I'm giving her a pair of extra arms, plus 2 little pincers at the side of her mouth for 8 limbs total. For her first design, I basically just copied down what I did for my original redesign. For my second thumbnail, I went with something a bit more loose and flowy to mimic the silhouette of Wisp's skirt. For the third design, I wanted to do the exact opposite, since Gigi is someone who is very sort of preppy and nervous. I wanted to do a lot of angles in her design and play with formal wear. For her fourth design, I combined those two ideas with a big swirly shawl and a plaid skirt, and the final idea was much more formal but very feminine. So then, combining all these ideas into my final thumbnail, I wanted to have her design be the inverse of a lot of the aspects that I used for Wisp's design, since Wisp is her shadow. So whereas Wisp's design have a lot of downward movements, such as the triangular point on her belt pointing downwards, I wanted to invert that with Gigi and have her outfit have a lot of upward weight. So I have these very dramatic shoulder pads, which combine to the angular, preppy vibe that I wanted her to have in comparison to Wisp, and I also have flame boots running up the side of her legs, because it parallels the dark shadows of Wisp's design with the light fire of day, and because in classical mythology they are sometimes said to be born out of smokeless fire. Another way I wanted to incorporate her design moving into her palette was having it be an inversion of Wisp's colors directly, and in some art they are depicted with pink skin. I also like the chelicerae on the side of the mouth, both because it ties into scorpions, which they can sometimes appear as, and because it takes the place of tusks that they are depicted with in art. I also wanted to incorporate a hijab into her design, as Jinn could be religious or not religious. Although it doesn't cover her ears like it would in a human, I imagine that it is slightly different in the Monster High world, accounting for her unique anatomy compared to humans. I wanted her design to have a lot of architectural elements, the same way I did with Rochelle's design, so I wanted to incorporate tiling into her outfit, as well as asymmetry. This tile pattern was very fun to do, and it didn't feel like it took as long as it actually did. I feel like the pattern ended up coming out a little bit snowflake-like, which is fitting for the season that I drew this in. So the base is a hexagon with a yellow star going through it, a hot pink center, and aqua icicle-like shapes. The colors are in reference to her original palette as well. I ended up putting the tiled pattern on one half of her 4-armed blazer, and the other half is going to be a red gold glitter. I wanted to keep her palette a lot lighter than I typically go with my Monster High redesigns, and keep her design very bright and light, again in contrast to her twin. I also wanted to incorporate a lot of jewelry and gold details into her design, match Wisp, and because I always associate light characters with a lot of gold metal jewelry because it's very reflective. Another thing I wanted to incorporate into her design is her love of astronomy. So she has these dangling earrings with star and moon pendants. I also wanted to give her a scorpion brooch and a feather tie pin, again in reference to classical Jinn art that features them with bird-like feathers on their arms and references again their ability to transform and appear as scorpions. One of the things I wish I'd kept from her original design were the telescope object heels, but I instead ended up going with this arched architectural design that transforms upwards into the flame boots. Although there is still a crescent moon at the heel of the shoe to keep in reference to her love of the stars, as she often feels trapped living in her bottle. I also really liked adding glitter all throughout her design to again keep that light reflective look. I also wanted to incorporate other patterns throughout her design so that the tiling on her blazer did not feel so out of place, but the stripes on her leggings ended up being a bit too much eye-strainy, and it wasn't quite working. So I ended up opting for some solid color leggings instead, and going with a checkered pattern on her skirt instead of the original plaid like I had planned. I also then changed up the color of this checkered so it wasn't just straight up orange and pink, and I added in some aqua as well. I also gave her some face tattoos of the moon changing phases to match her twins, but I did forget to add the henna designs on her hands to match Wisp, so imagine that they're there. I also gave her a flower pinned to her hijab for a bit of visual interest up top. At this point, I was really starting to have some trouble with getting all the different color values to match and look cohesive, so to try to pull things together, I ended up breaking my rule about no shading, and added some gold highlights to her skin to help it stand out against all of the intense patterns and glitters going on in her outfit. And I also ended up adding a color overlay to the entire piece to help tie the colors together a bit more cohesively. For the background, I just used the same background from my 2020 piece and squished it a little bit, and after some more little final color adjustments and level details, it is time for the reveal. So here's my redesign of Gigi. I'm really happy with how she came out. I definitely feel she's an improvement to my 2020 redesign, both in design itself and also art style. Her total redesign time was 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 24 seconds, which was the longest time of the 3 designs featured in this video, mostly due to the patterning and the issues that I had with getting the various colors in the palette to cohere. But overall, I'm really happy with how she turned out, and I especially think her face looks really cute. Moving on to the comparison between her G1 design and my redesign, there is a world of difference here, and I think the biggest difference is just time in which these designs were designed. I feel like if Gigi were to make a reappearance in Generation 3, she would probably look more similar to how I redesigned her, just due to, hopefully, the designers at Mattel having a bit more cultural sensitivity. But again, I don't claim to be an expert. But overall, I'm really happy with her redesign, and one of the things that I questioned with this redesign was, do I try to mimic my 2020 art style, or do I just do a current one? And I ended up just doing a current redesign. And who knows, maybe I can do a little bonus Wisp redesign in the future if people would like to see that. Let me know. Moving on to Posea, my baseline idea for her was a mermaid with an anemone tail. So starting out with her body type, I wanted her to be very muscular since she is the daughter of Poseidon, and he is always portrayed as being very buff. So for her first look, I kept it the same as a redesigned sketch I had done back in 2020, where she has this long anemone tendril hair and a gardener's apron and gloves. For the second look, I wanted to do a bit more regal looking with a big flowery hat and some interesting drapery going on. For her third look, I went more scaled back, emphasizing some practicality and gardening tools within her design, but with a pleated train behind her. For her fourth look, I went even more simplistic, but leaned more heavily on Greek chitons. And for her fifth look, I went more bare bones, so I wanted to keep it more practical using things like seaweed and nets. For her final design, I combined these elements and used a color palette inspired by the black and orange of Attic pottery and the neon greens and pinks of anemones and Greek reefs. I wanted her fashion to reflect both the practicality of gardening, since she gardens the souls of the sea creatures in her domain, and with high fashion of flowery florals and the historical fashion of ancient Greece. For Posea's redesign, I very much wanted her to be an embodiment of the reef that she looks after. So on top of her being an anemone herself, I also wanted to incorporate little bits of coral sticking out on her shoulders and some fan coral-like fins on her arm, as well as her having a molded-in crown to represent her royalty. I really enjoyed working with this color palette. And she was the fastest redesign of the 3 in this video by a long shot, coming in at only 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 55 seconds. I'm really happy with the orange-brown of her skin tone. For her makeup, she has this really geometric lime green eyeshadow with coral pink triangles drawn within it, and likewise she has the same coral pink on her upper lip but a black lower lip with lime green electricity drawn atop. Her hair was equal parts fun and a pain to draw, keeping track of all the different tendrils, but I think it turned out really unique and really fun. And I really love this idea. I imagine the execution of it being that same sort of texture and material as those like spiky, squishy, stretchy balls from childhood. And I love the idea of a doll that has an unconventional hair type that isn't just thin strands of nylon or poly, but also not just straight on molded on hair either. And for the color, I went with electric green with coral pink at the tips for highlights, since her having an unconventional hair type would also open it up for the possibility of gradient hair. I also wanted to incorporate some cute little details referencing her heritage, giving her a hot pink laurel around her hair and a choker necklace with a classical Greek geometric pattern wrapping around it, and a large conch shell as a pendant in reference to the Tritons of Greek mythology. Moving back to her clothing, for her apron, I decided to use these really crazy neon colors and then contrast it with the chiton that I have her wearing, where it is a soft pink with a coral pink around the edges and interior to mimic the look of the queen conch. It was fun using a lot of pink in her design, as I feel like it's a color I don't really use very often in my Monster High redesigns, and it wasn't super present in her original design either. I also gave her a very flowy wrap that has these sea pen-like tendrils and a hot pink at the edges. The base of her sea cape is a deep purple that I specifically wanted to be in reference to Tyrian purple, the color used for royalty and specifically made of the dye of sea snails, which feels very fitting for Posea. For the floral pattern of her wrap, I wanted it to be very abstract and electric and just a mishmash of colors in reference to her G1 design. I think what really pulled the cape together for me was the inclusion of this dark indigo color. I feel like it definitely helped deepen her palette and make everything cohere a bit, coordinating her wrap, her gloves, and her apron. I also wanted her garden gloves to include little webbing between the fingers to make her look all the more aquatic. Another detail that I wanted to add to her outfit was a strand of cowrie shells beaded around the narrowest point of her tail, with 2 shells on the end of it, in reference to how shells are often associated with luxury and richness, given that in early civilization they were often used for currency. I find it fun that while this piece definitely has a lot more colors going on than Gigi's palette did, I feel like I didn't have as much of trouble balancing the palettes. I feel like I get an automatic buff whenever I'm drawing some sort of mer creature, anything oceanic or aquatic. So moving on to the background, instead of using a typical photo like I would, I decided to just whip up a quick little vague background of a rock underwater with sunlight streaming down, since that was the location I had in mind when drawing the pose, and it would be easier to just draw than trying to find a photo that would fit. I also think having her against a blue background really helped to make those yellows and pinks pop, and the gray of the rock really pushed the vibrancy as well. So a little bit of sunlight particles drifting through the water column, and we are ready for the reveal. So here is Posea's final redesign. I'm really happy with how she turned out. I really adore this color palette, and it was exactly what I had in mind when I did my redesign over 5 years ago now. Youch! But I've always just loved the idea of an anemone for Posea because it's very unique, and it always kind of bothered me that her lower half was a bit amorphous. So something that was strange, like the sucker cup of an anemone, but something that's still very garden-like and ethereal felt very fitting for her. Moving on to her comparison between her and her G1 appearance, I like that you can definitely see the influence I took between her original design, but I also like how different she is. I don't know if either necessarily read as Daughter of Poseidon per se, but I do definitely think that the Greek influences are a bit more present in my redesign, though I was designing more mer creature forward than Poseidon forward, because that would just be a guy. But overall, I'm quite happy with her, and be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And last but not least, we have Ari Hauntington. Starting with her mood board, I always imagined her as being much more dominated by reds in her palette, something in the line of a red lady ghost story. But at the same time, I also wanted to differentiate her very heavily from Spectra. So in terms of typical ghost mythology, I wanted to combine stories of the red lady with also the child ghost aesthetic, since she is a teenage ghost. And I was thinking about the intersection of the fashion between something like a red lady ghost and a child, and the thing that came to mind of the blending of those two aesthetics of childish and more adult, and what instantly came to mind was a Riot Girl, which is absolutely perfect since he's also a musician. So, to differentiate her from Spectra as well, I wanted to give her a slightly chubbier body type as well. For the first thumbnail design here, I basically copied down a design idea that I had for redesigning her back in March of this year. For a second thumbnail, I pulled more from the Riot Girl band images on my mood board, going with a spotted jacket and tight shorts. For a third look, I wanted to go a bit more ethereal, leaning into the red lady more, with this spiked overcoat that has a ghostly aesthetic to it, and a hairpin that sticks out to one side of her head. For the fourth look, I wanted to give her a baby doll top with space buns on top, combining fishnets and the grungy undershirt with striped sleeves. And for her final thumbnail look, I was inspired by the lead singer of Fea, giving her an updo with a bandana and some cool shades, as well as a sweetheart neckline and leather skirt. Then, combining all these ideas together, I found myself a bit overwhelmed with all the ideas that I had, we'll say, where I just kept throwing on more and more layers, trying to make it work. You can see here I took a break to try and figure out her face, which also changed pretty drastically between the sketch and the final design, but I wanted her hair to have this sort of goopy texture to it, so instead of looking like hair strands, I wanted it to look sort of like a floating blob of etherealness, which in doll form would probably just be regular hair, but I imagine it could be a cool animated effect to have floaty, globby ectoplasm hair. Moving back to her color palette, I wanted to incorporate that red and red violet that I always associated with Ari, but overall I just felt a little bit lost ending out on this redesign, and I end up doing a couple different thumbnail sketches in my workbook just to try to work through the design a bit more, and ultimately I landed on something that I like that is a bit more simplified and streamlined than my original thumbnail sketch had outlined for me. In my original thumbnail redesign, I'd also had her have these red glasses, but I instead switched that to some intense red eye makeup and some blood drippy makeup effects at the top of her head. To help her palette not be so dark on top, I added some white streaks to her hair. One of the cool things about this streamlining process is that I also felt like her design ended up looking more G3, which was intentional because I wanted her to retain a bit of separation from the cast visually, since she was a character that was added in Generation 2 instead of Generation 1. So to simplify her silhouette, I changed the puff sleeves into being part of the overcoat that she wears, and kept the collar as part of the undershirt, which also has the striped sleeves as part of the shirt itself. I then gave her a leather skirt with some red bow details, but also a belt chain to keep that edge, with a pair of very ripped jeans underneath. I also gave her a pair of Monster High-Fied Mary Janes with some music note object heels. Similar to how Spectra's limbs trail off into transparency at the tips, I wanted her fingers to have that same effect, but I imagine it transitioning into a clearish red plastic instead of straight translucent. For accessories, I gave her a 1997 Rose Morris Rickenbacker, shout out if you catch the reference, and instead of a typical ghostly ball and chain, I had the idea of the ball instead being one of her own CDs. I really liked the way her palette turned out, especially on her guitar, and I feel like not a lot of MH dolls ever came with instrument accessories, although there were a couple guitars such as Astronova and maybe if you count Operetta's Purse. I'd originally planned for her jacket to be white with black and red splashes and a fluffy texture, but I found that I didn't really like how that looked. I felt like it looked a little too chaotic and heavy and distracting, so I instead played around with doing some just plain polka dots instead, and I really like the effect that it ended up having. It's almost optical illusion-esque to me. For the background, I'm just doing some red glowy ghostly aura effect and using a photo I took at a concert that I went to. I also added that same blood dripping effect underneath her choker because it looked like something is missing there to me, and only after I finished recording did I realize that it was because I did forget to add the pearl necklace, which is very iconic to a lot of red ghost mythology, so I added that in before finishing the piece. And now it is time for the reveal. And here's her final redesign. I'm really happy with how she turned out, and she might be one of my favorites of the bunch. I especially get the urge with her of like, ugh, I wish I could make a custom out of this. Her total redesign time was 2 hours, 2 minutes, and 43 seconds, the middle time of the group. I'm just so happy with how she turned out, especially in her palette and her shapes. But be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments below. For her comparison between how she canonically appeared, I think my redesign is very different from her, which is good because I was trying to get away from Spectra and not just make a Spectra replacement that was a completely different character. So I'm quite happy with the visual differences here. And I like that she still reads as ghostly to me, and that I still got to incorporate the idea of ghosts wearing vintage fashion that reflects the time in which they passed. And now here are the 3 redesigns from this video all together. Not to scale, of course, since Posea I imagine would be quite tall. I'm really happy with this trio, and I'm glad I did a little diversion from my main series to do something that was a little less effort, a little less going into depth onto all of my individual minute design detail choices. And let me know what you guys think of this different video format as a supplementary edition that doesn't take away from the main redesigns that I do. And speaking of main redesigns, I now have the finalized results of the polls that I took back in September, which means my next redesign in my video series is going to be Twyla. After that I'll be doing Cleo, then Draculaura, and then Persephone and Meowlity. After that I will poll again between the remaining 4, and then do another 2, and then take another poll between the final 2, and that will be the end, wink, of this Monster High redesign series. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more Monster High redesigns like this one. You can follow me on my Instagram where I post art at least 3 times a month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!